The Mysterious Treasure Hunt. Chapter 1. The Rumor of the Mysterious Treasure. Jackson and Zoe were playing in their backyard, watching the sun slowly set behind the trees. The air was cool and crisp, and they could hear the leaves rustling in the wind. Suddenly, they heard a strange noise coming from the woods behind their house. They both froze and listened closely, wondering what it could be. As they strained to hear, a whisper floated through the air. "Have you heard about the mysterious treasure?" it said. Jackson and Zoe looked at each other, their eyes widening with excitement. They had always been fascinated by stories of hidden treasure and secret quests, and now it seemed that one was just within their reach. They quickly rushed inside to ask their parents about the mysterious treasure. Their parents laughed and told them that it was just a silly rumor, but Jackson and Zoe refused to give up. They spent hours that night researching the legend of the mysterious treasure, scouring books and websites for any information they could find. The more they learned, the more convinced they became that the mysterious treasure was real. They were determined to find it and uncover its secrets. They made a pact to search for the treasure together, promising to never give up until they found it. As they drifted off to sleep that night, their minds were filled with visions of adventure and excitement. They could hardly wait to start their journey and discover what secrets lay hidden in the woods. Jackson and Zoe had made a pact to search for the mysterious treasure together and were determined to find it, despite their parents' skepticism. They were excited to start their adventure and uncover the secrets that lay hidden in the woods. Chapter 2. The Enchanted Forest of Belair. As the sun began to rise, Jackson and Zoe set out on their quest to find the mysterious treasure. They knew the journey ahead would be long and challenging, but they were determined to succeed. The siblings trekked through the woods, their eyes peeled for any sign of the treasure. They walked for hours, stopping only to rest and eat. As they traveled deeper into the forest, they noticed something strange about the trees. They were taller, wider, and more colorful than any trees they had seen before. Jackson's heart began to race as he realized they had entered the enchanted forest of Belair, the place where magical creatures lived. Zoe was ecstatic and couldn't wait to meet some of them. As they continued on, they came across a talking tree. At first, they were shocked, but the tree was friendly and offered to help them on their quest. It told them stories of how the forest got its name, and how it was said that the mysterious treasure was hidden somewhere within its borders. Excitement filled their hearts, and they continued on their journey, meeting many other magical creatures along the way. They saw mischievous fairies, playful gnomes, and even a unicorn. Each creature had a different story to tell about the treasure, and it seemed like they were all trying to steer them in a different direction. As the day turned to dusk, they found themselves at the edge of a deep, dark ravine. They knew they needed to cross it to continue their journey, but it was too wide to jump. They were about to give up when a giant bird landed beside them. The bird said its name was Blaze and offered to carry them across the ravine. Jackson was hesitant, but Zoe was excited at the prospect of flying. As they soared across the ravine, Zoe let out a scream of joy, while Jackson held on for dear life. As they landed safely on the other side, they thanked Blaze for his help and continued on their journey. They were tired, but their hearts were filled with excitement and wonder at the magical world they had discovered. At last, they found a small clearing where they could rest for the night. They sat by the fire, sharing stories of their journey so far. Zoe's eyes shone as she recounted the creatures they had met, while Jackson listened intently, making mental notes of any clues they might have missed. As the night wore on, they drifted off to sleep, dreaming of the adventures that lay ahead. Chapter 3. Splitting up and following different paths. Jackson and Zoe continued to walk through the enchanted forest of Belair, their eyes searching for any signs of the mysterious treasure. They had heard so many rumors about where it might be hidden that they didn't know where to begin. Finally, Jackson stopped and turned to his sister. "Zoe, I think we should split up and each follow a different path," he said. "We'll cover more ground that way and maybe we'll find something that the other missed." Zoe hesitated for a moment, looking uncertain. She didn't like the idea of separating from her brother in the middle of the enchanted forest. But she also knew that they needed to find the mysterious treasure if they wanted to make their wishes come true. "Okay," she finally said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "But let's set a time and place to meet up again, just in case we get lost or something." They agreed on a time and place and then went their separate ways. Jackson strode confidently through the forest, his eyes scanning the trees and the ground for any clues. Zoe, on the other hand, took a more leisurely pace, stopping to talk to the magical creatures they encountered along the way. As the hours passed, Zoe began to feel more and more nervous. She had never been alone in the forest before, and the trees seemed to grow taller and darker the farther she went. She was about to turn back and look for Jackson when she heard a rustling in the bushes ahead of her. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. But then a small, furry creature emerged from the bushes and looked up at her with big, friendly eyes. "Hello there," it said in a high-pitched voice. "My name is Flicker. What brings you to this part of the forest?" Zoe breathed a sigh of relief and smiled down at the creature. "I'm looking for the mysterious treasure," she said. "Have you seen it?" Flicker shook his head. "No, but I have heard some rumors about it. There's a cave on the other side of this hill where some of the other creatures say it might be hidden. Do you want me to show you the way?" Zoe's heart leaped with excitement. She thanked Flicker and followed him up the hill, her mind buzzing with anticipation. At the top of the hill, they found the cave that Flicker had mentioned. It was dark and foreboding, and Zoe hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. But then she thought of her brother and how proud he would be of her if she found the mysterious treasure. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, her eyes scanning the cave for any signs of the treasure. And then, just as she was about to give up hope, she saw a glint of gold in the corner of her eye. She hurried over to it, her heart racing with excitement. And then she saw it. The mysterious treasure lying on a pedestal in the middle of the cave. Zoe couldn't believe it. She had found it. She picked it up carefully, marveling at the way it glinted in the dim light of the cave. And then, suddenly, she heard a noise behind her. She spun around, clutching the treasure to her chest. And then she saw Jackson, standing in the entrance to the cave with a look of awe on his face. "You found it," he exclaimed. "I knew you could do it, Zoe." Zoe smiled, feeling a warm glow of pride in her chest. She had only found a small piece of the mysterious treasure. They would still have to continue their search. Chapter 4. Meeting magical creatures along the way. As Zoe and Jackson made their way through the enchanted forest, they encountered all sorts of magical creatures. Zoe was delighted to meet each one, but Jackson was more focused on their search for the mysterious treasure. The first creature they met was a talking tree named Oakley. Oakley had been around for centuries and had seen many adventures come and go. He knew all about the mysterious treasure and the challenges that lay ahead. He warned Zoe and Jackson about the dangers of the forest, but also offered them advice on how to navigate through it. Next, they came across a family of mischievous fairies who were playing a game of tag. Zoe joined in, and before long, they were all giggling and having a great time. Jackson, however, was growing impatient. He reminded Zoe of their mission, and they continued on their way. As they made their way deeper into the forest, they stumbled upon a clearing where a majestic unicorn was grazing. Zoe was in awe of the beautiful creature and approached it slowly. The unicorn looked up and gazed into her eyes. Zoe felt a connection with the unicorn and reached out to touch it. The unicorn nuzzled her hand, and Zoe felt a warmth spread through her body. Jackson, however, was skeptical of the unicorn's intentions. He didn't trust its magical powers and wanted to keep moving. Zoe pleaded with him to stay and admire the unicorn, but he refused. The siblings continued on their separate paths, with Zoe following the unicorn and Jackson forging ahead. At the end of the day, Zoe and Jackson met up again. Zoe was beaming with joy after her encounter with the unicorn, while Jackson was frustrated that they hadn't made more progress in their search for the mysterious treasure. They decided to rest for the night and continue their search in the morning. As they fell asleep, Zoe couldn't help but feel grateful for the magical creatures they had met along the way. She knew that their journey was about more than just finding the treasure. It was about discovering the wonders of the enchanted forest and the magic that existed all around them. Chapter 5. Lost in the Forest. After traveling through the forest for hours, they started to feel lost. The dense trees and foliage seemed to surround them on all sides, making it hard to see the sky. They tried to retrace their steps, but everything looked the same. The sun was setting, and they knew they had to find a safe place to rest for the night. As they walked, they heard a strange noise in the distance. It sounded like a howl, and it was getting closer. They were frightened and started to run, but they didn't know where they were going. Suddenly, they stumbled upon a clearing, and in the center of it was a small cottage. It looked abandoned, but they decided to investigate. When they approached the cottage, they saw that the door was ajar. A fire was burning in the fireplace, and there was a pot of soup simmering on the stove. As they were about to help themselves to some soup, an old woman appeared in the doorway. She looked surprised to see them but welcomed them inside. They explained their situation to her, and she told them that she lived in the cottage alone and had not seen anyone else in the forest for years. The old woman listened to their story and offered them a place to rest for the night. She warned them not to wander too far from the cottage, as the forest could be dangerous at night. They gratefully accepted her offer and settled down for the night, feeling relieved to be safe and warm. As they drifted off to sleep, they couldn't help but wonder about the old woman and her cottage. They had a feeling that there was more to her than met the eye. But for now, they were just glad to have found shelter in the midst of their uncertainty. The adventurers fell fast asleep in the old woman's cottage, where they were safe and warm. Chapter 6. Run-in with mischievous fairies. After they had left the old woman's cottage, they wandering through the forest for hours. Zoe and Jackson finally saw a flicker of light in the distance. They quickened their pace, hoping to find a way out of the forest. As they approached the light, they saw that it was coming from a group of fairies dancing around a small fire. The fairies noticed Zoe and Jackson and flew over to them, giggling and whispering to each other. They introduced themselves as the mischievous fairies and offered to help Zoe and Jackson find their way out of the forest. But there was a catch. The fairies wanted Zoe and Jackson to play a game with them first. The game was simple enough. The fairies would hide objects throughout the forest, and Zoe and Jackson had to find them all before dawn. If they won, the fairies would lead them out of the forest. If they lost, the fairies would keep them trapped in the forest forever. Zoe and Jackson had no choice but to agree to the game, and soon they were running through the forest, searching for hidden objects. It wasn't easy, as the fairies had a knack for hiding things in plain sight, but Zoe and Jackson managed to find all the objects just before dawn. The fairies kept their promise and led Zoe and Jackson out of the forest, but not before stealing something from them. Zoe realized that her necklace, a family heirloom, was missing. The fairies cackled with glee as they flew away, leaving Zoe and Jackson alone on the edge of the forest. Zoe was devastated. She had lost something precious to her, and she didn't know how to get it back. Jackson tried to comfort her, but she pushed him away, blaming him for getting them into this mess. At that moment, Zoe and Jackson realized that they needed to work together if they were going to find the treasure and make it out of this adventure alive. With a newfound determination, they set off towards their next destination. Zoe and Jackson are more united than ever, ready to face whatever comes their way in their search for the mysterious treasure. Chapter 7. Stuck in quicksand. After a long day of trekking through the enchanted forest, the siblings had grown tired and decided to rest by a small river. They were enjoying the cool breeze when they suddenly heard a loud rumbling noise. Before they knew it, the ground beneath them began to shake, and they felt themselves sinking into the earth. It wasn't long before they realized that they were stuck in quicksand. No matter how much they struggled, they could not free themselves. Panic set in as they began to sink deeper and deeper. Zoe was the first to react, frantically trying to come up with a solution. She remembered reading about quicksand in one of her adventure novels and recalled that movement was the key to getting out. She instructed Jackson to move his arms and legs as much as he could. As they followed Zoe's instructions, they gradually started to feel their bodies being lifted out of the quicksand. With a final push, they emerged from the quicksand, exhausted and covered in mud. They sat down to catch their breath and clean themselves up when they heard a faint sound coming from a nearby tree. It was a group of mischievous fairies giggling at their misfortune. Zoe scolded them for their rude behavior, but the fairies simply laughed and flew away. Feeling defeated and demoralized, the pair realized that they were now completely lost in the forest again. They had no idea which direction to go in or how to find their way back. As they sat there, contemplating their situation, they could feel the darkness of the forest closing in around them. The siblings were lost and uncertain of what to do next. Chapter 8. Finding the mysterious treasure. After escaping the quicksand, Zoe and Jackson continued on their journey. They walked for hours until they finally reached the end of the enchanted forest, where they found an old, abandoned castle. The castle was surrounded by a moat, and a large stone bridge led to the entrance. As they crossed the bridge, they noticed that the castle was in ruins. The walls were crumbling, and the roof was missing in some places. But despite its dilapidated state, the castle still had an eerie aura of mystery and magic. As they entered the castle, they noticed a faint glow emanating from one of the rooms. They cautiously made their way towards the source of the light, and when they reached the room, they were amazed to see a treasure chest sitting in the center of it. Zoe and Jackson approached the treasure chest, and as they opened it, they were met with a blinding light. When their eyes adjusted to the brightness, they saw that the chest was filled with gold coins, precious gems, and ancient artifacts. Overwhelmed by the sight of the treasure, Zoe and Jackson stood there in silence for a moment. But then Zoe's eyes fell on a small, glowing orb that was nestled in the corner of the chest. She picked it up, and as soon as she did, she felt a jolt of energy course through her body. Suddenly, a voice spoke to them from out of nowhere. "Congratulations," the voice said. "You have found the treasure that has been lost for centuries. But be warned, the power of this treasure is not to be taken lightly." Zoe and Jackson exchanged a nervous glance, unsure of what the voice meant. But before they could react, they heard a loud noise coming from outside the castle. They rushed to the window and saw that the enchanted forest was starting to crumble and collapse. Realizing that they needed to leave before the forest completely disintegrated, Zoe and Jackson grabbed as much treasure as they could carry and quickly made their way out of the castle. As they ran through the forest, they could feel the ground shaking beneath them. But they didn't stop until they were safely out of the forest and back into the real world. Breathless and exhausted, Zoe and Jackson collapsed onto the ground, the treasure chest beside them. As they caught their breath, they looked at each other, both realizing that their lives would never be the same after this incredible adventure. Zoe and Jackson had found the mysterious treasure, but they had no idea what kind of power it held or what kind of consequences it could bring. Chapter 9. The real treasure is the journey. Zoe and Jackson sat on the riverbank, gazing at the glittering treasure spread out before them. The sight was magnificent, and they couldn't believe they had found it. But the treasure was not what they were most excited about. As they sat there, they realized that the real treasure was the journey they had been on together. They had been through so much, faced dangers, and discovered new things about themselves and each other. Their adventure had brought them closer together, and they had forged a bond that could never be broken. Zoe turned to Jackson and smiled. "This has been the best adventure ever," she said. Jackson grinned back. "Definitely, and we couldn't have done it without each other." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was crisp, and the forest around them was quiet. It was a peaceful moment, and they both felt grateful for it. Eventually, Zoe broke the silence. "I never would have thought that a treasure hunt could be so much more than just finding treasure." Jackson nodded. "Me neither. I've learned so much about myself and about you. And I wouldn't have wanted to go on this journey with anyone else." Zoe smiled, feeling a warm glow in her chest. She felt the same way. As they sat there, watching the sky turn dark, they knew that the journey they had been on would stay with them forever. The treasure they had found was just a bonus. The real treasure was the memories they had created, the challenges they had faced, and the friendship they had formed. They sat there for a while longer, enjoying each other's company and the peaceful surroundings. They knew that their adventure had come to an end, but they were both excited to see where their next journey would take them. Zoe and Jackson reflected on their adventure and realized that the real treasure was the journey itself. Chapter 10. Cherishing the friendship that made it all possible. As Zoe and Jackson looked back on their adventure, they couldn't help but feel grateful for each other. They had started out as two siblings who were always at odds, but now they had a bond that would last a lifetime. Sitting by the fire that they had built, they reminisced about their journey. They talked about the enchanted forest and the magical creatures they had encountered. They laughed about getting lost and sinking in quicksand. And they smiled at the memory of finding the mysterious treasure. But what made their adventure truly special was the fact that they had done it together. They had learned to rely on each other, to trust each other, and to support each other. They had become true friends. As they talked, Zoe and Jackson realized that the real treasure was the journey itself. The treasure had brought them together, but the experiences they had shared along the way were what really mattered. They made a pact to always cherish their friendship and to never forget the lessons they have learned. They promised to keep exploring the world together, to keep learning and growing, and to always have each other's backs. As the night wore on, they sat in silence, watching the stars twinkle above them. Zoe couldn't help but feel emotional as she looked at her brother. She knew that their adventure had changed them both, and she was grateful for every moment of it. At last, Jackson broke the silence. "Thanks for being my partner in crime," he said, grinning at Zoe. She smiled back. "Always," she replied. And with that, they sat back, enjoying the warmth of the fire and the comfort of each other's company. They knew that their journey was just the beginning, and they couldn't wait to see where life would take them next. At the end, Zoe and Jackson were at peace, cherishing the friendship that had made it all possible.